In the unforgiving landscapes of the American frontier, some actions can never be undone. Some decisions echo through generations, and some secrets, once revealed, change everything we thought we knew. This is not just another tale from the Wild West. This is the story of a man who stood against the tide of history, a woman whose desperate plea went unheeded, and a town forever changed by what happened next. "Please, don't pull it," she begged, her voice breaking with desperation. The black rancher looked down at her, his expression unreadable. The gathered townspeople held their breath. What would happen next would send shockwaves through the territory and challenge everything they believed about justice, mercy, and what it means to be truly free. Stay with me until the very end, because the final revelation will change how you see everything that came before. This isn't just a story about our past. It's a mirror reflecting truths we're still grappling with today. Before we ride deeper into this harrowing tale, take a moment to subscribe to the Black Rancher channel and share this video with someone who appreciates powerful stories that challenge our understanding of history. Hit that notification bell to never miss our weekly journeys into the untold stories of black cowboys and ranchers who shaped the American West. Now, let's begin our journey. The year was 1878. The small town of Redemption Creek was nestled between rolling hills and vast golden plains in the New Mexico Territory. The railroad had just reached the area 6 months prior, bringing with it the promise of prosperity and the certainty of change. Isaiah Freeman rode into town on a Thursday, the dust of the trail still clinging to his dark duster coat. His stallion, jet black save for a single white patch on its forehead, trotted down the main street as townsfolk paused to observe the newcomer. Isaiah sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders squared against the weight of stares that followed him. He was used to the looks. A black man traveling alone in these territories was still uncommon enough to draw attention, especially one who carried himself with such quiet confidence. The six-shooter at his hip was well worn, but meticulously maintained, and the rifle in his saddle holster gleamed in the afternoon sun. "Afternoon?" Isaiah nodded to an elderly shopkeeper who was sweeping his porch. The old man hesitated before returning a curt nod. Isaiah continued toward the livery stable at the far end of the street. He had business in Redemption Creek, business that couldn't wait. The stable boy, no more than 14, approached cautiously as Isaiah dismounted. "Take good care of Shadow here," Isaiah said, handing the reins over along with a silver coin that made the boy's eyes widen. "He's traveled far and deserves a good rub-down and fresh oats." "Yes, sir," the boy stammered, his initial apprehension giving way to curiosity. "You staying long in Redemption Creek, mister?" Isaiah adjusted his hat, his dark eyes scanning the town's main street. "That depends on what I find here." At the far end of the street stood the imposing two-story structure of the Territorial Bank and Land Office. Next to it, the sheriff's office, with its small attached jailhouse. And across from both, the Paradise Saloon, where piano music drifted out onto the street. "Is that where most folks gather?" Isaiah nodded toward the saloon. "Yes, sir, especially since Mr. Harrington bought it last year. He runs most everything in town now." The boy lowered his voice. "Some say he's eyeing the mayor's position next." Isaiah's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "This Mr. Harrington, tall man, scar running through his right eyebrow?" The boy's eyes widened. "You know him?" "We've never met," Isaiah replied, patting Shadow's flank one more time. "But I've heard stories." As the stable boy led Shadow away, Isaiah reached inside his coat and withdrew a folded paper, a weathered wanted poster bearing the image of a man with a distinctive scar through his eyebrow. The name printed below, Victor Harrington. The charges, fraud, theft, and murder. Isaiah carefully refolded the poster and tucked it away. He hadn't come to Redemption Creek by chance. He'd been tracking Harrington for nearly 6 months, following a trail of broken promises and ruined lives across 3 territories. But Isaiah wasn't a bounty hunter. This was personal. He made his way to the modest hotel across from the livery, secured a room for several nights, and washed away the dust of the trail. As dusk fell over Redemption Creek, he changed into a clean shirt, strapped his holster back on, and headed toward the Paradise Saloon. The saloon grew quieter as he entered. conversations pausing mid-sentence as heads turned. Isaiah ignored the stares and made his way to the bar. "Whiskey," he said to the bartender, placing a coin on the polished wood. The bartender, a heavy-set man with a thick mustache, hesitated only briefly before pouring the drink. "Haven't seen you in these parts before," the bartender observed. "Just arrived today," Isaiah replied, taking a measured sip of his drink. Heard Redemption Creek was a town of opportunity. A short laugh came from further down the bar. A man in an expensive suit raised his glass slightly. "Depends on what kind of opportunity you're looking for, friend." Isaiah took another sip, studying the man's reflection in the mirror behind the bar. Not Harrington. One of his associates, perhaps. "I'm a rancher by trade," Isaiah said, "looking to maybe settle if the land's right." This seemed to relax some of the tension in the room. "Tay black rancher" was something they could understand, still uncommon but not unheard of. "You'd want to talk to the land office then," the bartender offered, "or Mr. Harrington directly. He holds deeds to most of the good grazing land hereabouts." Isaiah nodded thoughtfully. "I'll do that. Mr. Harrington in town currently?" "He'll be here tonight," the man in the suit interjected. "Always comes in around 8 to play cards. I could introduce you if you'd like." Isaiah smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'd appreciate that. Always best to deal directly with the man in charge." As the evening progressed, Isaiah nursed his drinks and observed the room. He learned that the man in the suit was Edward Phillips, Harrington's business partner and the town's only lawyer. He learned that the sheriff, one Tom Wilkins, was deeply in Harrington's pocket, and he learned that not everyone in town was content with Harrington's growing influence. At the back of the saloon, a young woman played the piano. She was mixed race, her skin a warm copper tone, her dark hair pulled back in a simple style. She played skillfully, her fingers dancing across the keys with practiced ease. Occasionally she would look up and scan the room, her gaze lingering on certain patrons before returning to her music. When her eyes met Isaiah's, something passed between them, a moment of recognition, though they'd never met before. She gave him the slightest nod before continuing her playing. Just before 8, the piano player finished her set and disappeared through a side door. Minutes later, the saloon doors swung open and a hush fell over the room. Victor Harrington had arrived. He was just as the wanted poster depicted, tall, broad-shouldered, with a distinctive scar through his right eyebrow. He wore an immaculate black suit with a silver watch chain draped across his vest. His salt-and-pepper hair was slicked back, and his clean-shaven face wore a smile that never reached his cold blue eyes. "Evening, gentlemen," Harrington announced, his voice carrying the hint of a southern accent. "Beautiful night for cards and whiskey, wouldn't you say?" Several men voiced their agreement. Philip stood and approached Harrington, leaning in to whisper something. Harrington's gaze swept the room until it landed on Isaiah. His smile remained fixed, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Well, well," Harrington said, approaching Isaiah's table. "I understand we have a newcomer interested in ranching opportunities." Isaiah stood, standing eye to eye with Harrington. "That's right, Isaiah Freeman." He extended his hand. Harrington took it, his grip firm. "Victor Harrington, welcome to Redemption Creek, Mr. Freeman. I understand you've traveled some distance." "A fair piece," Isaiah acknowledged. "From where, if I might ask?" Isaiah met Harrington's gaze steadily. "Most recently, Kansas, before that, Texas." "Texas," Harrington repeated, something unreadable flickering across his features. "Interesting. Well, if it's land you're interested in, you've come to the right man. Perhaps we could discuss possibilities over a game of poker." "I'd like that," Isaiah said. As they moved toward Harrington's regular table at the back of the saloon, the piano player returned. Her eyes widened slightly at seeing Isaiah seated with Harrington, but she quickly composed herself and began to play again. "Ah, the lovely Miss Catherine," Harrington commented, nodding toward the pianist. "Talented, isn't she? One of our town's more unique attractions." The card game began with Harrington, Isaiah, Phillips, and 2 other men, a cattle buyer named Wilcox, and the town doctor, Harrison. The conversation flowed with the whiskey, with Harrington dominating most of it, speaking of the town's promising future and the opportunities for those smart enough to get in early. Of course, ranching requires significant investment, Harrington said, dealing another hand. Cattle, hands, equipment, not to mention protection. Protection? Isaiah asked, arranging his cards. Wild country out here, Mr. Freeman. Rustlers, bandits, desperate men of all sorts. A lone rancher might find himself vulnerable. The threat was veiled but clear. Isaiah simply nodded, raising the bet. As midnight approached, Catherine finished playing and began to gather her sheet music. Harrington waved her over. "Gentlemen, I believe I'll call it a night," he announced, standing. "Mr. Freeman, why don't you join me for breakfast tomorrow at my home? We can discuss potential arrangements more concretely." "I'd be obliged," Isaiah replied. Harrington turned to Catherine. "My dear, would you show Mr. Freeman out? I have some matters to discuss with Edward and the good doctor." Catherine nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "Of course, Mr. Harrington." Once outside the saloon, Catherine's demeanor changed. She glanced quickly up and down the street before speaking in a hushed tone. "You shouldn't be here," she said urgently. "Whatever you think you're doing, it's not worth it." Isaiah raised an eyebrow. "I'm not sure I take your meaning, Miss Catherine." She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw how you looked at him. I know a man on a mission when I see one, but you don't understand what Harrington is capable of." "Perhaps I understand better than most," Isaiah replied quietly. Catherine shook her head. "Meet me behind the church at dawn tomorrow, before you see Harrington, please." Before Isaiah could respond, she turned and hurried back toward the saloon's side entrance. Isaiah stood there for a long moment, watching the shadows between buildings, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon him. His hand rested on the grip of his pistol as he finally turned and walked slowly back to his hotel. The game had begun, but it was already taking unexpected turns. And in his experience, unexpected turns were usually dangerous ones. Chapter 2. Buried Secrets. Dawn broke over Redemption Creek in streaks of amber and gold. Isaiah had been awake for hours, cleaning his revolver and thinking through his next moves. He'd come to bring Harrington to justice, to make him pay for the lives he'd destroyed back in Texas, including the murder of Isaiah's brother. The official story was that James Freeman had died in a tragic accident when a fire broke out in his small ranch house. But Isaiah knew the truth. James had been on the verge of exposing Harrington's land-grabbing scheme, a scheme that had driven several black and Mexican ranchers off their rightfully owned properties. Isaiah slipped out of the hotel just as the sky was lightening, making his way to the small white church at the edge of town. It stood on a gentle rise with a small cemetery behind it. Catherine was already there, wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill. She tensed when she heard his footsteps, relaxing slightly when she saw it was him. "You came," she said, relief evident in her voice. "You seemed convinced it was important," Isaiah replied. Catherine looked around nervously before speaking. "I know who you are, or at least I think I do. You're from Willow Creek, Texas, aren't you?" Isaiah's expression remained neutral, but his hand instinctively moved closer to his weapon. "What makes you say that?" "Because my mother was from there too," Catherine said. "Maria Diaz." Recognition flashed in Isaiah's eyes. "Maria? She worked for the Petersons." Catherine nodded. "She was friends with your brother's wife, Esther. When everything happened, when James died, she knew it wasn't an accident. She tried to speak up, but..." "But what?" Isaiah pressed. "Harrington's men came for her in the night. She barely escaped with me. We've been running ever since, changing names, moving whenever he got close." Catherine's eyes glistened with unshed tears. 6 months ago, she got sick. Before she died, she made me promise to keep hiding. But then I heard rumors that Harrington himself had moved here, establishing himself as a respectable businessman. "So you followed him," Isaiah concluded. "Why?" "The same reason you're here, I imagine. Justice." Catherine pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "But there's something you need to know first. Something my mother discovered before we fled." She handed him the paper. It was a deed to a large parcel of land made out to the Freedman's Cooperative Ranch. with James Freeman listed as the primary stakeholder. "This is the real reason Harrington wanted your brother dead," Catherine explained. "It wasn't just about silencing him. James had organized several families, former slaves and Mexican farmers, to pool their resources and purchase one of the largest cattle ranges in the county, land that Harrington had already promised to his investors back east." Isaiah studied the document, his jaw clenching. "James never mentioned this to me. He was trying to protect you. He knew how dangerous Harrington was." Catherine took a deep breath. "But there's more. Look at the witnesses who signed the deed." Isaiah's eyes widened as he read the name. Sheriff Thomas Wilkins. "The same Sheriff Wilkins who now serves as Harrington's enforcer here in Redemption Creek," Catherine confirmed. "He was a deputy back in Texas. He knows the truth, but Harrington has something on him, something that keeps him loyal." The sun was now fully above the horizon, painting the cemetery in golden light. Isaiah carefully folded the deed and handed it back to Catherine. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because you can't just kill Harrington if that's what you're planning," she said urgently. "Not only would you hang for it, but the truth would die with him. We need to expose him, make everyone see what he really is." Isaiah considered her words. "You've been here longer than me. What's his weakness?" "His reputation," Catherine replied without hesitation. "Everything he's built here is based on the image he's created, the successful businessman, the town benefactor. If that image were shattered, he'd lose his power," Isaiah finished. Catherine nodded. "There's something else you should see." She led him through the cemetery to a small unmarked grave at the far corner. "This is where they buried Clara Johnson 3 months ago." "Who was she?" Isaiah asked. "Harrington's housekeeper," Catherine said, her voice bitter. "A young woman from a poor family outside of town. She was found at the bottom of the stairs in his mansion. The official story was that she fell, but..." She trailed off. "You don't believe it?" "I saw her at church the Sunday before she died. She was terrified, said she needed to talk to someone about what happens at the big house. We arranged to meet, but she died before she could tell me anything." Catherine's hands clenched into fists. "The doctor ruled it an accident, and she was buried here without ceremony." Isaiah looked thoughtfully at the grave. "You think Harrington killed her?" "I think she knew something that threatened him," Catherine corrected. "Just like your brother did." The church bell began to toll, marking 7 o'clock. Isaiah looked toward town. "I'm supposed to meet Harrington for breakfast soon." "Be careful," Catherine warned. "He'll seem charming, generous even. That's how he operates. He'll offer you something, land, a business opportunity, protection, but there will always be strings attached." Isaiah nodded. "Where can I find you later?" "I room above the bakery. Mrs. Wilson knows me as Catherine Baker." She hesitated. "Whatever he offers you today, accept it. Get close to him. It's the only way we'll find what we need." As they prepared to part ways, Catherine gripped his arm. "One more thing. There's a woman who works in Harrington's house. Martha. She was Clara's friend. If anyone knows what really happened, it's her." Isaiah tipped his hat. "Thank you, Catherine. Your mother would be proud of you." A sad smile crossed her face. "Just don't make me bury another good man in this cemetery." Howdy, folks. You're watching The Black Rancher, the channel that brings you the untold stories of the American frontier. If you're enjoying Isaiah's dangerous quest for justice, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Our community is growing faster than a prairie fire, and we'd love to have you join us on this journey through the hidden history of the West. Remember to share this video with friends who appreciate authentic stories about courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Every share helps us continue bringing these powerful narratives to light. Now, let's return to Redemption Creek, where Isaiah is about to enter the lion's den. Harrington's mansion stood on a hill overlooking Redemption Creek, a towering Victorian structure that seemed out of place in the rugged frontier town. As Isaiah approached, he noted the strategic position. The house had clear sight lines in all directions. No one could approach unseen. A servant, an older black man with stooped shoulders, answered Isaiah's knock and led him through an opulently decorated foyer to a bright solarium at the rear of the house. Harrington sat at a table laden with food, reading a newspaper. Ah, Mr. Freeman. Harrington folded his paper and stood, gesturing to the chair opposite him. Right on time. I appreciate punctuality in business associates. Isaiah took the offered seat, noting the use of business associates rather than guests. Beautiful home, he commented, accepting a cup of coffee from the servant. Thank you. I believe a man's surroundings should reflect his ambitions, Harrington replied. I built this place when I first arrived in Redemption Creek. The locals thought I was mad to invest so much in what was then little more than a dusty crossroads. Now they understand my vision. The breakfast was elaborate. Fresh eggs, thick-cut bacon, biscuits with gravy and fruit that must have been shipped in at considerable expense. As they ate, Harrington outlined his various business interests in the region. I own the bank, of course, and the land office. I have controlling interest in the mine 15 miles west, and I've recently acquired most of the water rights to the creek that gives this town its name. Harrington's smile was cold and calculating, but my first love has always been cattle ranching. Isaiah listened, playing the role of an impressed potential business partner. Sounds like you've cornered the market on just about everything worth having. Harrington laughed. Not everything. Not yet. But I'm a patient man, Mr. Freeman. I see opportunities where others see only wilderness and hardship. And what opportunity do you see in me? Isaiah asked directly. Harrington's eyes gleamed with appreciation for the direct approach. I see a man with experience and, I suspect, considerable skill. A man who has known hardship and survived it. A man who might be valuable in the right position. What position would that be? I'm expanding my ranching operation, Harrington explained, cutting into his steak. I've acquired several thousand acres south of town. Good grazing land with reliable water access. What I need is someone who understands cattle and can manage men. Isaiah raised an eyebrow. You're offering me a job as a ranch foreman? To start, Harrington nodded, with the potential for partnership down the line, assuming things go well. The irony wasn't lost on Isaiah. This man had murdered his brother to steal his ranch, and now he was offering Isaiah a position managing stolen land. For that's a generous offer, Isaiah said carefully, though I had hoped to establish my own operation. A noble ambition, Harrington acknowledged, but a difficult one to achieve without significant capital and local connections, both of which I could help you acquire in time. As they spoke, a young woman entered the room to clear away some dishes. She was perhaps 20, with light brown skin and downcast eyes. Isaiah noticed a fading bruise on her wrist as she reached across the table. Martha, Harrington called sharply when she accidentally rattled a cup in its saucer. Do be more careful. Yes, Mr. Harrington, she murmured, her voice barely audible. Isaiah caught her eye briefly as she worked. This must be the Martha that Catherine had mentioned, Clara's friend. Good help is increasingly difficult to find, Harrington sighed after she left, especially since my previous housekeeper met with an unfortunate accident. The casual way he referenced Clara's death sent a chill down Isaiah's spine. I heard something about that, Isaiah said. A fall, wasn't it? Harrington's expression darkened momentarily before his smile returned. Yes, tragic. The girl was like family. He waved a hand dismissively. But we were discussing business, not domestic troubles. The rest of the meal passed with Harrington, outlining the specific duties Isaiah would have, the salary he would receive, and the accommodations provided at the ranch house. Everything sounded reasonable on the surface, generous even. I'd like to see this ranch before making any decisions, Isaiah said as they finished their coffee. Of course, Harrington agreed readily. I have some business in town today, but perhaps tomorrow we could ride out in the morning, spend the day surveying the property. That would be acceptable, Isaiah nodded. As they rose from the table, Harrington placed a hand on Isaiah's shoulder. One more thing, Mr. Freeman. I value loyalty above all else in my employees. I reward it generously and... His grip tightened slightly. I do not tolerate its absence. Isaiah met his gaze steadily. I've always believed a man should be clear about where he stands. Indeed, Harrington smiled, releasing his grip. I believe we understand each other. As the servant showed Isaiah out, he caught another glimpse of Martha disappearing down a hallway. He would need to find a way to speak with her alone. Back in town, Isaiah made a show of visiting the general store to purchase supplies, establishing his cover as someone planning to stay. He casually asked questions about the area, particularly about Harrington's ranch and its previous owners. "Can't rightly say who had it before, Mr. Harrington," the shopkeeper told him. "That land was part of an old Spanish grant, sat empty for years after the war. Mr. Harrington bought it from the territory, fair and square." Isaiah doubted that very much, but he simply nodded and continued his shopping. Later that afternoon, he spotted Martha leaving Harrington's town office, carrying a basket of what appeared to be mail and parcels. He followed at a distance, waiting for an opportunity to approach her without drawing attention. His chance came when she stopped at the dressmaker's shop, stepping inside with her basket. Isaiah positioned himself across the street, leaning against a hitching post as if waiting for someone. When Martha emerged 15 minutes later, her basket considerably lighter, she headed down a side street toward the residential area of town. Isaiah followed, quickening his pace to catch up to her in a relatively quiet section of the road. "Excuse me, miss," he called softly. Martha startled, nearly dropping her basket. "Yes, sir." Her eyes widened in recognition. "You're Mr. Freeman. From breakfast?" "That's right," Isaiah said, keeping a respectful distance. "I was hoping I might have a word with you about Clara Johnson." The color drained from Martha's face. She glanced nervously up and down the street. "I don't know anything about that. I can't talk to you." "I understand you're afraid," Isaiah said gently. "But Clara deserves justice, as do others who have suffered at Harrington's hands." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. He has eyes everywhere. If he even sees me talking to you, I can protect you," Isaiah promised. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "No one can protect anyone from him, not even the law." She clutched her basket tighter. "Please just leave me be. I have children to think about." Before Isaiah could respond, the sound of approaching horses made them both turn. Sheriff Wilkins and a deputy were riding toward them. "Afternoon, Mr. Freeman," the sheriff called, his hand resting casually near his holster. "Making friends already, I see." "Just asking directions," Isaiah replied smoothly. Martha nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, Sheriff. Mr. Freeman was looking for the telegraph office." Wilkins studied them both for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "Is that so? Well, it's right back on Main Street, Mr. Freeman. Can't miss it." He tipped his hat to Martha. "You should get on home now, Martha. Wouldn't want to keep Mr. Harrington waiting for his mail." "Yes, Sheriff," Martha murmured, hurrying away without looking back. Wilkins turned his attention fully to Isaiah. "Word of advice, Freeman. Redemption Creek is a peaceful town. We like to keep it that way. Folks who stir up trouble don't tend to stay long." "I'm not looking for trouble, Sheriff," Isaiah replied evenly. "Just opportunities, like any man." "See that it stays that way," Wilkins warned, before turning his horse and continuing down the street, his deputy following closely. Isaiah watched them go, his expression thoughtful. His conversation with Martha had confirmed his suspicions. Harrington's grip on the town was based on fear, and it extended to every corner of Redemption Creek. That evening, Isaiah made his way to the bakery where Catherine lived. Mrs. Wilson, a kindly older woman, directed him to the small apartment above the shop after he mentioned he had a message from the church. Catherine was surprised to see him, but quickly ushered him inside. "What happened with Harrington? What did he offer you?" Isaiah explained the job offer and his planned trip to the ranch the following day. "He's cautious but confident. Too confident." "That's always been his weakness," Catherine nodded. "He believes himself untouchable." "I tried to speak with Martha today," Isaiah continued. "She's terrified. Mentioned she has children to protect." "2 boys," Catherine confirmed. "Her husband died in the mine last year, another accident that benefited Harrington. He offered her a position in his household afterward, presented it as charity." Isaiah's expression darkened. "And Clara, what do you think she knew that got her killed?" Catherine hesitated. "There have been rumors, about parties at the mansion, important men from the territorial capital, wealthy investors from back east, and young women brought in from surrounding towns and then sent away again. "You think Harrington is running some kind of operation?" Isaiah asked, his disgust evident. "I think Clara saw something she shouldn't have," Catherine replied, "and I think Martha knows what it was." A plan was beginning to form in Isaiah's mind. "Tomorrow I'll be at Harrington's ranch all day. That might be our chance to speak with Martha without Harrington or his men present." "It's risky," Catherine warned. "If we're caught..." "Sometimes justice requires risk," Isaiah said quietly. As darkness fell over Redemption Creek, Isaiah returned to his hotel, his thoughts heavy with the weight of what he'd learned. Harrington's crimes went beyond land theft and his brother's murder. The man had built an empire on suffering, and it was long past time he answered for it. But Isaiah knew he would need more than righteous anger to bring Harrington down. He would need evidence, witnesses willing to speak the truth, and perhaps most importantly, patience. Tomorrow he would see Harrington's operation up close, looking for weaknesses, while continuing to play the role of an ambitious rancher seeking opportunity. The web was complex, but every web had its vulnerable strands. As he cleaned his revolver one final time before sleep, Isaiah thought of his brother James. "I'm close," he whispered to the empty room. "I haven't forgotten my promise." Dawn had barely broken when Isaiah met Harrington outside the Paradise Saloon. 2 other men accompanied them, Phillips, Harrington's lawyer, and a hard-eyed foreman introduced simply as Maddox. They rode south out of town, following the creek for several miles, before turning west into rolling grasslands dotted with mesquite and juniper. The landscape opened up before them, vast and promising. Under different circumstances, Isaiah might have appreciated its beauty and potential. 15,000 acres, Harrington announced proudly as they reached a rise overlooking the property. "Water rights secured, grazing enough for 5,000 head once we clear some of this brush." Isaiah surveyed the land with a practiced eye. It was good country, the kind ranchers dreamed of claiming. "Where are the cattle now?" "We've got about 1,000 head on the north section," Maddox answered, pointing to a distant valley. "Plan is to bring in another 1,000 from Texas next month." They spent the morning riding the boundaries, Harrington pointing out landmarks and discussing his plans for expansion. Isaiah listened carefully, asking questions that demonstrated his knowledge of ranching while looking for inconsistencies in Harrington's story. Around midday, they arrived at the ranch house, a substantial structure built of stone and timber, with several outbuildings and corrals nearby. A bunkhouse stood a short distance away, with cowboys visible moving between the buildings. "Your quarters would be here," Harrington indicated a well-built cabin near the main house. "Private, comfortable, with your own stable. The men respect a foreman who maintains some distance." Inside the main house, ranch hands were preparing lunch. Isaiah noted that most of the workers were Mexican, with a few white cowboys serving as crew bosses. The hierarchy was clear, and familiar from other operations he'd seen. As they ate, Harrington outlined the operation in more detail. The ranch primarily raised cattle for beef, with some horses bred for both work and sale. There was talk of expanding into sheep on the eastern ranges, though Maddox clearly disapproved of the idea. "Sheep and cattle don't mix," the foreman muttered. "Progress requires adaptation," Harrington countered smoothly. "The wool market is growing. We'd be foolish to ignore it." After the meal, they toured the working areas of the ranch, the barns, corrals, and smithy. Isaiah paid close attention to the men, noting their reactions to Harrington. There was respect born of fear, but little loyalty in their eyes. As they approached a large corral where several cowboys were breaking horses, a commotion erupted. A young Mexican vaquero was thrown from a bucking Mustang, landing hard against the corral fence. The horse, a magnificent black stallion with wild eyes, continued to buck and rear, threatening to crash through the fence. "Damn it, Ramirez!" Maddox shouted, dismounting quickly. "I told you that one wasn't ready!" The injured vaquero struggled to his feet, clutching his arm. "Lo siento, Senor Maddox. He seemed calmer today." Maddox looked disgusted. "Get to the doctor. That arm's probably broken." As Ramirez limped away, Maddox turned to one of the other cowboys. "Shoot that animal." "He's too wild to be useful." The cowboy reluctantly drew his revolver, and aimed at the still bucking horse. "Wait," Isaiah called, stepping forward. All eyes turned to him, including Harrington's, whose expression showed curious interest. "You have a better idea, Freeman?" Maddox challenged. Isaiah approached the corral fence slowly. "That's a valuable animal. Just needs the right handling." Maddox scoffed. "We've had 3 men thrown trying to break him. He's vicious." "He's scared," Isaiah corrected, studying the horse's movements, "and he's been mishandled." Without waiting for permission, Isaiah climbed over the fence, entering the corral with slow, deliberate movements. The stallion snorted and pawed the ground, ears pinned back against its head. Isaiah began speaking in a low, steady voice, not approaching the horse directly but moving at an angle, his body language non-threatening. The cowboys watched in tense silence. Harrington's eyes narrowed with interest. "Easy now," Isaiah murmured, gradually decreasing the distance between them. "Nobody's going to hurt you today." The stallion's ears flicked forward briefly, a sign of curiosity breaking through the fear. Isaiah continued his approach, still talking softly. When he was about 10 feet away, he stopped and simply stood, hand extended but making no move to close the final distance. For several long minutes, man and horse remained in this standoff. The cowboys watched in tense silence. Harrington observed with calculated interest, while Maddox looked skeptical. Finally, the stallion took a hesitant step forward, then another. It stretched its neck out, nostrils flaring as it caught Isaiah's scent. When the horse's muzzle finally brushed against Isaiah's palm, a murmur of appreciation went through the watching men. "Well, I'll be damned," one of the cowboys muttered. Isaiah gently stroked the horse's neck, then slowly moved his hand to its withers, maintaining contact and continuous soft speech. The stallion remained tense, but allowed the touch. "Bring me a rope," Isaiah called quietly. "A long one, and move slowly." One of the vaqueros carefully slid a coiled rope through the fence. Isaiah took it without making any sudden movements, allowing the horse to sniff it before gently looping it around the animal's neck. Not tight enough to trap, but secure enough to establish connection. "This horse isn't broken," Isaiah said, leading the now somewhat calmer stallion in a small circle. "But he could be one of the finest mounts on this ranch with proper training." Harrington applauded slowly. "Impressive, Mr. Freeman, very impressive indeed." Isaiah led the horse to the fence, handing the rope to one of the vaqueros. "Cool him down, walk him around. No saddle today. Just let him know, not all humans mean pain." The man nodded respectfully. "Si, senor." As Isaiah climbed back over the fence, Harrington clapped him on the shoulder. A man who understands horses that well usually understands men just as deeply. "I believe you'd be an excellent addition to our operation, Mr. Freeman." Maddox didn't look pleased by this endorsement, but he said nothing. They continued the tour, with Isaiah noting the operation's strengths and weaknesses. The land was excellent, the infrastructure solid, but the management seemed harsh and inefficient. Fear might motivate men to work, but it rarely inspired their best efforts. As the afternoon waned, they began the ride back to town. Harrington rode alongside Isaiah, leaving Phillips and Maddox to follow at a distance that allowed for private conversation. "What do you think of my operation, Mr. Freeman?" Harrington asked. "You've claimed good land," Isaiah replied honestly. "Built solid foundations. The men need better handling, though." Harrington laughed. "Much like that stallion, you think?" "Men and horses respond to similar principles," Isaiah said. "Respect earns more than fear in the long run." An interesting philosophy, Harrington mused, though perhaps a bit idealistic for the territories. They rode in silence for a moment before Harrington spoke again. "I've had inquiries made about you, Mr. Freeman. Telegrams sent to contacts in Kansas and Texas." Isaiah's hand casually moved closer to his revolver. "Is that so?" "Standard business practice," Harrington assured him. "I never bring anyone into my organization without thorough vetting." "And what did your inquiries reveal?" "That's the curious thing." Harrington's voice took on a harder edge. "No one seems to recall an Isaiah Freeman ranching in either territory, at least not recently." They had reached a narrow passage between 2 rocky outcroppings. The perfect spot for an ambush, Isaiah realized. his senses suddenly alert. "Perhaps your contacts aren't as thorough as you believe," Isaiah suggested calmly. "Perhaps," Harrington conceded. "Or perhaps you aren't being entirely truthful about who you are and why you've come to Redemption Creek." Before Isaiah could respond, Harrington raised his hand, and Maddox and Phillips drew up alongside them. The atmosphere had shifted palpably. "I'll ask you directly, Mr. Freeman," Harrington said, his friendly demeanor falling away. "What is your real purpose here?" Isaiah assessed his options quickly. They were still several miles from town, in isolated country. 3 against 1 weren't odds he liked, especially with Maddox's hand hovering near his weapon. "My purpose is exactly what I said," Isaiah replied evenly. "I'm looking for opportunities. Your operation impressed me today. I believe we could do business together." Harrington studied him intently, clearly weighing the response. Finally he nodded, though his eyes remained suspicious. "We shall see. The position remains open to you, should you decide to accept it. I'll expect your answer within 2 days." The tension eased slightly, though Isaiah remained vigilant as they continued toward town. Harrington had suspicions, but not certainty. There was still time to execute his plan. As they rode into Redemption Creek in the fading light, Harrington invited Isaiah to join them at the Paradise Saloon that evening. "We can discuss terms in more detail. I find that whiskey often lubricates business negotiations." Isaiah agreed, knowing that refusing might heighten Harrington's suspicions. They parted at the livery stable, with Isaiah promising to meet them at 8. Once alone, he quickly made his way to Catherine's lodgings above the bakery. She listened intently as he described the day's events. "He's suspicious," she said worriedly. "That's dangerous." "But he's not certain," Isaiah countered, "and his ego won't let him believe someone would dare challenge him directly. That's our advantage." "What about Martha?" Catherine asked. "Did you find an opportunity to speak with her today?" "No, but Harrington will be at the saloon tonight, which means his house may be less closely watched." Catherine's eyes widened. "You're planning to go there tonight?" "We need evidence," Isaiah said firmly. "Martha won't talk willingly because of her children, but there might be something in that house. Papers, ledgers, something that proves what Harrington has done." "It's too risky," Catherine protested. "If you're caught—" "Justice always carries risk," Isaiah reminded her. "I'll meet Harrington at the saloon as planned, make my excuses after an hour or so, and then circle back to his mansion while he's still in town." Catherine shook her head, but knew there was no dissuading him. "At least let me help. I can create a distraction if necessary." They spent the next hour planning. Catherine would position herself near Harrington's mansion, watching for any sign of trouble. If Isaiah wasn't out within an hour, she would create a diversion that would draw attention away from the house. As dusk settled over Redemption Creek, Isaiah made his final preparations. He checked his revolver, tucked a small knife into his boot, and donned a dark jacket that would blend into the night. At 8 precisely, he pushed through the batwing doors of the Paradise Saloon. Harrington and his associates were already at their usual table, cards and whiskey flowing freely. "Ah, Freeman," Harrington called, gesturing to an empty chair. "Join us, the first drink is on me." Isaiah played his role carefully, drinking moderately, discussing ranch business, and presenting himself as a man seriously considering Harrington's offer. After an hour, he noticed Harrington becoming increasingly focused on his card game and the growing pile of money at the center of the table. "Gentlemen," Isaiah said, rising from his chair, "I believe I'll call it a night." "Long day in the saddle." Harrington barely glanced up from his cards. "Think about my offer, Freeman. It won't remain open indefinitely." "I'll have an answer for you tomorrow," Isaiah promised, tipping his hat before making his exit. Outside, he waited in the shadows until he was certain no one had followed him, then made his way through back alleys and side streets toward Harrington's mansion on the hill. The night was clear, with a quarter moon providing just enough light to navigate but not enough to expose him. As planned, Catherine was waiting at the edge of Harrington's property, concealed behind a large oak tree. She nodded silently as Isaiah approached. "Any movement?" he whispered. "2 guards patrolling the grounds," she replied softly, "and lights in what must be the servants' quarters." Isaiah surveyed the mansion. Most of the windows were dark, but a lamp burned in what appeared to be a study on the ground floor. "I'm going in through the back," he decided. "If I'm not out in 1 hour, create your distraction at the front gate." Catherine squeezed his arm briefly. "Be careful." Isaiah moved silently around the perimeter of the property, watching the guards' patrol pattern. They were predictable, 10 minutes between passes of any given point. When the moment was right, he slipped over the low stone wall and moved quickly from shadow to shadow until he reached the rear of the house. A servant's entrance was his target. The lock was simple, yielding easily to his small set of picks. Within moments, he was inside, standing in a dark kitchen. He paused, listening intently for any sound of movement within the house. Hearing nothing, he moved cautiously through the kitchen and into a hallway lined with doors. The first was a pantry. The second, a small dining room likely for the servants. The third door opened into a narrow passage that led toward the front of the house. Following it, Isaiah found himself in the main foyer he'd entered that morning. Across from him was what appeared to be Harrington's study, the room where light still burned. Checking for any sign of household staff, Isaiah crossed the foyer and carefully opened the study door. The room was empty, though a lamp still burned on the desk. Bookshelves lined the walls, and a large map of the territory hung behind the desk, with certain areas marked in red. Isaiah quickly began searching through the papers on the desk, looking for anything that might incriminate Harrington. Most were routine business documents, cattle purchase agreements, payroll ledgers, bank statements. But in a locked drawer, which Isaiah skillfully opened, he found something more interesting. Letters bearing the territorial governor's seal. Reading quickly, Isaiah discovered evidence of bribery. Harrington had been paying the governor to look the other way regarding land claims, particularly those of Mexican families whose grants predated American control. He was carefully replacing the letters when he heard a floorboard creak behind him. Isaiah spun around, hand reaching for his weapon, only to find Martha standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. "Mr. Freeman," she gasped. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for the truth," Isaiah replied honestly, not drawing his weapon. "About Harrington, about what happened to Clara." Martha's face contorted with grief at the mention of Clara's name. "You should leave. Now. If he finds you here..." "Martha," Isaiah said gently, "I know you're afraid for your children, but this man has hurt too many people. He killed my brother back in Texas. He's stolen land, ruined lives. And I think you know what really happened to Clara." Tears welled in Martha's eyes. She saw things at one of his parties, important men with young girls who didn't want to be here. Isaiah's suspicions were confirmed. "Harrington is trafficking young women." Martha nodded miserably. "Clara was going to tell the pastor. She couldn't bear it anymore. The night before their meeting, Martha's voice broke. "He pushed her down those stairs. I heard them arguing. I heard her scream. When I ran out, he was standing at the top of the staircase, and she was just lying there." "Did anyone else witness this?" Isaiah asked urgently. "The butler. He saw it too. But Harrington paid him to leave town the next day." Martha wrung her hands. "Please, you have to go. I can't help you. I can't testify. My boys..." "Your boys deserve to grow up in a town free from Harrington's corruption," Isaiah said, "just as those girls deserve their freedom." A sound from outside, the front door opening, made them both freeze. "He's back early," Martha whispered in panic. "You have to hide." Isaiah quickly assessed the situation. "Is there another way out of this room?" Martha shook her head. "Only through the foyer." Footsteps approached the study. Martha's eyes darted around frantically before settling on a large wooden cabinet in the corner. "In there," she hissed, pulling it open to reveal a space barely large enough for a man. "Quickly!" Isaiah squeezed into the cabinet just as the study door swung fully open. Through a small crack, he could see Harrington enter, followed by Sheriff Wilkins. "You're certain?" Harrington was saying, his voice tense with anger. "My deputy followed him from the saloon," Wilkins confirmed. "He was headed in this direction, but we lost him near the Oak Grove." Harrington slammed his fist on the desk. "I knew there was something wrong about him from the start. Freeman. That name should have been my first clue." You think he's related to the one from Texas? Wilkins asked nervously. James Freeman had a brother, Harrington replied. Isaiah, I should have made the connection sooner. What do you want me to do? Harrington paced the room, passing close to the cabinet where Isaiah hid. Find him. Tonight, bring him to the old mine shaft, not the operating one, the abandoned one further up the ridge. We'll get the truth out of him, and then we'll make sure he's never found. Martha had slipped into the shadows near the door, trying to make herself invisible, but as she shifted position, the floorboard creaked beneath her feet. Harrington whirled around. Who's there, Martha? What are you doing lurking about? She stepped forward, trembling visibly. I was just checking if you needed anything, Mr. Harrington. I heard you come in. Harrington stared at her suspiciously. At this hour, you should be in your quarters with your brats. Yes, sir, she murmured, eyes downcast. I'll go now. Wait, Harrington's voice stopped her. You haven't seen anyone unusual around the house tonight, have you? A visitor? Someone asking questions? Martha shook her head quickly. No, sir, no one. Harrington studied her face intently before dismissing her with a wave. Go on then, and tell the guards to double their patrols tonight. As Martha hurried from the room, Harrington turned back to Wilkins. I want men watching the hotel, the livery stable, anywhere Freeman might show up. And I want him alive at first. There are questions that need answers. What about the woman, the piano player? Wilkins asked. They've been seen talking. Catherine Baker, Harrington nodded. Have her picked up as well, quietly. Isaiah's grip tightened on his revolver inside the cabinet. Catherine was in danger now too. Wilkins and Harrington continued discussing their plans for several more minutes before finally leaving the study. Isaiah waited until their footsteps had faded completely before cautiously emerging from his hiding place. The house was silent now, but he knew he had little time. Harrington's men would be searching the town, and Catherine was likely still waiting near the property, unaware of the danger. Moving quickly but silently, Isaiah retraced his steps to the kitchen and slipped out the servants' entrance. He kept to the shadows, circling around to where he had left Catherine. She was still there, relief flooding her face when she saw him. Did you find anything? She whispered. Yes, but there's no time, Isaiah said urgently. Harrington knows who I am. He sent men to find us both. We need to leave town tonight. Catherine's face paled. Where can we go? He has connections throughout the territory. The nearest federal marshal's office, Isaiah decided. It's 2 days' ride, but it's our only chance. I have letters proving Harrington has bribed the territorial governor, and Martha confirmed he murdered Clara. She witnessed it. Will she testify? Isaiah shook his head grimly. Not as long as Harrington has power over her children, but the letters might be enough to start an investigation, and once one person speaks up, others will follow, Catherine finished. We need horses. The livery will be watched, Isaiah said, but I have an idea. They moved carefully through the darkness, avoiding the main streets as they made their way toward Harrington's ranch outside town. Isaiah's plan was risky, steal horses from Harrington himself, but it was their best chance of escaping before the net closed around them. As they passed the cemetery at the edge of town, Catherine suddenly pulled Isaiah behind a large tombstone. Moments later, 2 of Harrington's men rode by, rifles clearly visible in their saddle holsters. The whole town will be searching for us soon, Isaiah murmured. Catherine nodded grimly. Then we'd better hurry. Dawn was breaking as Isaiah and Catherine approached Redemption Creek, riding horses borrowed from a sympathetic rancher 30 miles away. The 2 days at the federal marshal's office had been productive. Marshal James Corbett had been investigating rumors of corruption in the territorial government for months, and Isaiah's evidence provided the breakthrough he needed. Now they returned with Corbett and 6 deputies, all carrying federal warrants for Harrington, Wilkins, and several associates on charges ranging from bribery to murder. Remember, Corbett cautioned as they crested the final ridge overlooking the town, Harrington won't go down without a fight. His men are loyal because they're well paid, not because they believe in him. Once they see federal badges, most will stand aside. It's Wilkins who concerns me, Isaiah said. He has too much to lose. Corbett nodded. That's why we're taking the sheriff's office first, before word spreads that we're here. They entered town from the east as shopkeepers were opening for the day. Few people were on the streets, allowing the group to reach the sheriff's office with minimal notice. 2 deputies secured the rear exit, while Corbett, Isaiah, and the others entered through the front door. Wilkins was at his desk, coffee in hand, when they walked in. His eyes widened at the sight of Isaiah, then narrowed as he noted Corbett's badge. "What's the meaning of this?" he demanded, hand moving toward his holster. "I wouldn't," Corbett advised calmly, his own weapon already drawn. "Sheriff Thomas Wilkins, I have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory to murder." Wilkins paled but kept his hand hovering near his gun. "This is territorial jurisdiction. You have no authority here." "Federal crimes override territorial jurisdiction," Corbett replied. Hand-bribing a territorial governor is very much a federal crime. For a moment it seemed Wilkins might resist. Then his shoulders slumped and he raised his hands. "Harrington will kill me if I talk." "Harrington will be joining you shortly," Corbett assured him, nodding to a deputy who moved forward to disarm and handcuff the sheriff. With Wilkins secured, they moved quickly to their next target, the Paradise Saloon, where Phillips, Harrington's lawyer, was known to take breakfast. They found him at his usual table, napkin tucked into his collar as he cut into a steak. His arrest was even less dramatic than Wilkins's. At the sight of federal badges, Phillips immediately began offering to cooperate, naming names and promising documents in exchange for leniency. "Harrington won't be at the mansion," he told them nervously as a deputy secured his wrists. "Not now. He has a meeting at the ranch today. Something about a cattle purchase." Isaiah and Catherine exchanged glances. "He's lying," Catherine said. "There's no cattle purchase. He's trying to give Harrington time to escape." Corbett studied Phillips's sweating face. "I think you're right. We'll split up. 3 deputies to secure the mansion, the rest of us to the ranch." As they prepared to leave the saloon, the piano player from Isaiah's first night in town approached hesitantly. "I heard you're finally going after Harrington," she said. "That's right," Isaiah confirmed. She glanced around nervously before continuing. "There's something you should know. Last night there was talk about moving the merchandise from the old mine to somewhere further south. Harrington was real worked up about it." "The girls," Catherine whispered. Isaiah turned to Corbett. "We need to check the abandoned mine shaft, the one on the ridge west of town." "The girls can wait," Corbett insisted. "Harrington is our primary target." "No," Isaiah said firmly. "This was never just about Harrington. It was about justice for everyone he's hurt. Those girls deserve to be rescued now, not after we've dealt with him." Corbett hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "You and Catherine take 2 of my men to the mine. The rest of us will secure Harrington, but be careful. If he's moving them today, there will be armed guards." The plan agreed upon, they separated outside the saloon. As Isaiah, Catherine, and 2 deputies headed toward the livery to retrieve fresh horses, a commotion erupted at the far end of the street. Harrington himself was riding into town, accompanied by Maddox and 4 ranch hands. He pulled his horse up short at the sight of Isaiah standing openly in the street. For a moment, the 2 men locked eyes across the distance. Then Harrington's face contorted with rage. "Freeman!" he shouted, drawing his revolver. "Federal marshals!" Corbett yelled, stepping forward with his badge held high. "Victor Harrington, you're under arrest!" Instead of surrendering, Harrington fired, his bullet striking the boardwalk near Corbett's feet. Chaos erupted as townspeople scattered for cover and the marshals drew their weapons. "Get to the mine," Isaiah shouted to Catherine and the 2 deputies assigned to them. "Those girls are the priority." As Catherine and the deputies mounted and rode west out of town, Isaiah took cover behind a water trough, drawing his revolver. Harrington and his men had dismounted and taken positions behind overturned wagons and barrels. "You're surrounded, Harrington," Corbett called. "Throw down your weapons." Harrington's answer was another shot, followed by sustained fire from his men. The marshals returned fire, and the main street of Redemption Creek became a battlefield. Isaiah moved carefully from cover to cover, working his way around to flank Harrington's position. Citizens peeked fearfully from windows and doorways as the gunfight continued. Suddenly, Isaiah spotted Martha running across the street, her 2 young sons clutched by the hands. They were directly in the line of fire. "Cease fire," Isaiah shouted. "Children in the street!" Most of the shooting stopped, but Maddox, seeing an opportunity, raised his rifle and aimed at the exposed marshals. Isaiah fired first, his bullet striking Maddox in the shoulder and spinning him around. As Martha and her children reached the safety of a storefront, the gunfight resumed. One by one, Harrington's men were hit or surrendered, until only Harrington himself remained, pinned down behind an overturned freight wagon. "It's over, Harrington," Corbett called. "You've got nowhere to go." "It's never over," Harrington shouted back, his voice strained with desperation. "You think you can just ride in here and take everything I've built? This is my town." "Not anymore," Isaiah replied, having worked his way to a position where he had a clear shot at Harrington. "Throw down your weapon." Harrington turned, seeing Isaiah just 20 feet away, revolver aimed steadily at his chest. For a moment, it seemed he might surrender. Then his eyes hardened. "You're just like your brother," he snarled. "Too righteous to see the reality of this world. Power is all that matters in the end." "James saw reality clearly," Isaiah countered. "He saw that men like you feed on fear, but fear has a limit." Harrington's face twisted into a sneer. "Let's test that theory." With startling speed, he lunged sideways and grabbed a young woman who had been huddled behind the wagon with him, one of the saloon girls, frozen in terror when the shooting started. Holding her in front of him as a shield, Harrington pressed his revolver to her temple. "Back off, all of you, or she dies." The marshals held their fire. Isaiah didn't lower his weapon, but he didn't shoot either. "Let her go, Harrington," he said calmly. "There's no way out of this." "There's always a way out for men like me," Harrington replied, edging backward toward an alley, dragging the terrified woman with him. "I have friends in high places. I'll be free within a week, and then I'll hunt down every person who betrayed me." His back was now at the mouth of the alley. "Starting with those whores at the mine," he added maliciously. "You should have heard Clara beg before I pushed her. Just like this one will beg." Before he could finish, the young woman in his grasp twisted suddenly, driving her elbow into his ribs with surprising force. Harrington's grip loosened just enough for her to pull away, dropping to the ground. Isaiah had his clear shot, but instead of firing immediately, he called out, "Victor Harrington, federal marshals have you surrounded. Throw down your weapon, last chance." Harrington looked at him with hatred and raised his gun. "You're dead, Freeman, you and your—" Isaiah fired. His bullet struck Harrington square in the chest. The man staggered backward, shock spreading across his face as he looked down at the crimson stain blooming on his expensive shirt. You shot me," he said incredulously, as if the concept that anyone would dare harm him was more shocking than the wound itself. "For James," Isaiah said quietly, "and for everyone else you destroyed." Harrington fell to his knees, then collapsed face forward in the dust of the street he had once ruled. The town of Redemption Creek fell silent as its tyrant breathed his last. 2 hours later, Isaiah rode up to the abandoned mine shaft where Catherine and the deputies had gone. They had successfully freed 17 young women, most under 20 years of age, who had been held captive for Harrington's operation. The guards had surrendered quickly when confronted with federal badges. "They'll need care," Catherine told him, as they watched the deputies helping the traumatized girls onto wagons for the journey back to town. "And their families will need to be found. The women of the church will help," Isaiah said, "and Martha has already offered her assistance." "With Harrington gone, people will step forward." Catherine studied his face. "And what about you? What will you do now?" Isaiah looked out over the landscape, the vast, promising land that Harrington had tried to claim through violence and corruption. Land that could now be distributed justly. "I made a promise to James," he said, "to see justice done. That promise is fulfilled." "But," Catherine prompted, sensing there was more. Isaiah smiled slightly. "But perhaps there's more justice yet to be done. Other Harringtons out there. Other towns like Redemption Creek." "It's a big territory," Catherine observed. "And beyond that, an even bigger country," Isaiah agreed. "All built on promises of freedom that too often go unfulfilled." As they mounted their horses to return to town, Isaiah took one last look at the mine where so much suffering had occurred. "Please, don't pull it," she had begged. The mysterious plea from the title of their story now made sense. The young woman had been begging Harrington not to pull the lever that would seal the mine shaft, trapping her and the others inside during his planned escape. But the Black Rancher had pulled a different kind of lever, the trigger that ended Harrington's reign of terror and brought a measure of peace to Redemption Creek. And as news spread throughout the territory, people fell silent in amazement at the story of how one man's pursuit of justice had uncovered a web of corruption and saved so many lives. Redemption Creek might finally live up to its name, Isaiah remarked as they rode side by side. Catherine smiled. With people like you helping to guide it. Isaiah didn't confirm or deny the suggestion. There would be time enough to decide his future. For now it was enough that justice had been served, and the silence of fear that had gripped the town had been replaced by the silence of awe and the promise of a new beginning. Thank you for joining us on this journey with Isaiah Freeman, the Black Rancher who stood against corruption and brought justice to Redemption Creek. If you enjoyed this story of courage, determination, and the fight for what's right, please support the Black Rancher channel by subscribing, hitting that notification bell, and sharing this video with friends and family. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful narratives to light, stories of the forgotten heroes who shaped the American West, whose contributions have too often been erased from history. Leave a comment below telling us what you thought of Isaiah's journey and what other untold stories from the West you'd like to see featured on this channel. Remember, history is richer, more diverse, and more fascinating than we're often taught. Until next time, this is the Black Rancher, riding through history to reveal the truth.